from dynastyleaguefootball.com and the DLF family of podcasts. It's me, it's Tommy B, live, joined by my very good friend, Jake from the Dynasty Underdog podcast. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. I think you meant to say newly acquired trade partner. That is going to be my new title. I can't believe that I'm finally in a league with the FF Tommy B. So it's been pretty good. You know, I can't complain. Life has been nice over the last few weeks. How are you doing?
Everything considered, I'm doing pretty well, man. Like, life is kicking my ass a little bit. I think it's probably kicking a lot of people's ass right now. But this is a pretty good escape, man. Like, having you join a dynasty league with me, it's an escape. I love the fact that, across the country, you and I get to connect and like match wits and be friends and share strategies and laugh at the other folks in the league and then try to beat them, with our own spin. It's really fun because you, Jake, are somebody that I don't understand how you don't have a bigger following. Like, I know that's not why you do this, but you're a part of my favorite podcast out there, the Dynasty Underdog podcast. For the folks who don't know about your show, do you mind just like plugging it for a second? Because it's worthy of like right off the top mentioning that, because you guys do amazing strategy talk and you're really one of the engines behind the content and the ideas of that show.
Thank you. Sure. Yeah, I'd love to plug it. We're actually very consistent. We probably push about 52 to 54 episodes a year. We run on Tuesdays live on YouTube at 8 p.m. EST. We are a Dynasty-centric podcast that really is covering everything from beginner strategy, trying to get adapted into Dynasty, all the way to more advanced ideology, strategies, understanding different metrics, understanding Tommy's work as well. You know, we've dove into a little bit of the number butts 10 within the show. We try and provide exposure to all of the folks that we have so much respect for within the industry. And, this is truly a place where I do find myself kind of being able to escape a little bit from my general work life as a boring finance bro and see myself be able to expand a little bit, because I do think that there is some extension of oneself in this podcasting world, in this place of being able to play Dynasty Fantasy Football. There's this other element to be able to kind of show a little bit more of who you are. And that's what we try and do on Dynasty Underdog.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We've got a few folks already in the chat. Dynasty Koopa, another great podcast host. Hey, how you doing, Koopa? It's great to see you. He says, woohoo, excited to see you both live. It's great to be live. We don't do this enough, or I don't do this enough on the Superflex Super Show. And I kind of think we should. I love the engagement with the listeners. I like the concept of being live. Like, we don't edit our shows by any means. But when you're live, you never know what's going to come up, like what's going to happen in the chat. And I really admire that about y'all's show. It's great to be able to be part of the conversation, literally, on Dynasty Underdog.
We really do want to bring in all of our listeners into the conversations themselves. They're all experiencing completely different interactions within their own leagues. They have different experiences that they have to offer as well. And I think the most important thing that we can gain from the rest of the people that we play with, or the other people that are listening to us, is just to learn through their own lens. Like, so much of the ability to adapt in Dynasty Fantasy Football is to look at the game through other people's perspectives, or else you won't be able to then create the kind of direction or the misdirection that you want to within the leagues that you're playing. And I think that's the biggest thing that I think a lot of people within the space don't actually gain from their own cohort of listeners, right? Like, they just don't engage with them. And so, shout out to you and John with the Superflex Super Show Discord server. Like, it is a beautiful place of just open communication about dynasty strategy, about analyzing different types of data and analytics. And it's a really magnificent place to be, because I think not just you, but like everybody's constantly learning from one another.
Oh, yeah, totally. And it pushes me to explore in ways that suit me best, right? Like, I'm a data person. That's what I do in my daily life, right? So it kind of makes sense to me, and that's what I can contribute to the space. And other folks do that. Here's a few comments I want to make sure that I'm bringing up here, because when you are live, you say some crazy shit, man. You specifically, but we all say some crazy shit, and it's fun that we don't take ourselves too seriously, you know. So Ricky says, "Here we're big fans of minority running backs," and Joe follows up by saying, "Let's see if I can get that up on the screen." Oh yeah, especially Asian running backs. That's such a great part of this is just like not taking ourselves too seriously. But man, I did write down a few questions when I was making soup today. I just texted myself a few questions and forwarded them over to you. Um, I thought maybe we could just kind of like potpourri this episode. Does that work for you?
That works for me.
Cool. This is the time of year where like there's a big reset, at least for me, of redefining what is important, what I want to track through the non-point scoring season, how I want to like build out the fundamentals of my own strategies. And like I alluded to earlier, a lot of that comes from energy management. It comes from my life as a father, as a dog owner, as a property owner, as a traveler. All of those things sort of just contribute to the way that I view fantasy football, right? Like it's all kind of interconnected for me. And I want to start by asking you, like, where in the real world do you get inspiration for dynasty play? Because I mentioned this earlier. You're one of the big engines for the concepts that you guys come up with. And it's crazy how much content you guys cram into an hour and a half each week. Where are you drawing from in your real personal life or the world to get these ideas out?
Yeah, I think I alluded to it before. A lot of it does come from our listeners or experiences within the leagues in which we see, and it isn't necessarily myself. I do feel like this is such a weird comment to make, but I tend to put myself in other people's shoes when I see their interactions. And therefore, what I mean by that is like if I see a specific engagement, let's say someone overbids on a player by 20% fab or something like that. I start to think about like the why that happened and how they're experiencing it. And so for a lot of my like individual content creation, I find myself trying to derive how can we better that impact or how can we better this navigation for that individual player to the macro scale, because the reality is that they're not the only one doing it. Like there are so many people who are doing it. There are so many people looking on Wednesday morning saying to themselves, oh crap, like I shouldn't have done that. Like there was a better way for me to better analyze what the rest of my league was going to do with that individual player on waivers. And so for me, it really does like form off of what are sociological, there we go, tendencies that we can lend a hand from. Like we see so many things that happen in the real world, but we also see so many things happen in these micro markets called our fantasy leagues. And I don't think we take away enough from the mistakes just as much as we don't take away enough of the success from a lot of our league mates. And that's what I'm always trying to do from both a content creation perspective, but also like how am I going to best counter that individual moving forward in that league? Like someone else's success should always be their demise moving forward is how I see it as someone who's competing against them. Do you have any other real worlds examples of like what you're trying to bring into the dynasty sphere?
Oh, totally. I do want to circle back to something you said because it sparked something in my mind that was like, oh, this is different for me. Nobody likes overpaying by 20% in a trade, right? That's borderline embarrassing. It induces shame for me if I get the feedback of like, hey, idiot, you paid way too much for that, right? That's sort of the dynasty calculator or KTC or Twitter mindset of like, this is a concrete thing. You better not pay that or more than that, certainly. Otherwise, shame on you. With Fab, it's different for me though. With me, like it shows conviction. When I overpay by 20% on my Fab bids for a player, it's like, fuck yeah, you stay away from this profile because you're not going to get it. You have to way overpay if you want to play in this sandbox with me. And it's partially because Fab is ever reloading, right? We get it for free. The cost is the buy-in, right? And so using it aggressively, using it as a statement, to me at least, is a positive. If you want to try to turn that around on me, that's okay. We can do Fab Wars because I'm very comfortable with $0 and $1 Fab bids for the rest of the season. If I get Jarquez Hunter, who somehow slipped through a draft and who never did a dang thing, but I really like the profile and I'm not going to let you have that at value. I'm going to make you way overpay if you want it. and this is my flag plant doing so. How do you feel about that?
It's something that we constantly talk about. Like specifically, I can only talk to Billy and myself because we are notorious for it. But I will sometimes overspend, somewhere in the 70 to 80% range if there is a specific profile coming out of a rookie draft that I know that I want on my roster. I know that if they were sitting there at the 411, 412 of my rookie draft, I would have drafted them over whatever my opponents were doing. Sometimes I'll trade into those spots to try and grab those players, and sometimes those things just don't work out, and you don't end up getting into those positions to draft them. So I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with the emphasis of overbidding. I think it's more so about trying to decipher where are there places, and this is actually something that you brought up before or within the sheet, is trying to best understand how can we become more efficient, because that singular maneuver could potentially open you up to other pieces to play with in your sandbox, right? Like there are multiple avenues, and I don't ever believe that there's like a singular asset that should kind of usurp the rest, because more often than not, that doesn't exist. Sometimes there will be. Like for instance, I think this is a really good one, but Trevor Etienne, right? Sitting there like right on the cusp of a 4th round draft capital running back. It's like he fell out of a lot of rookie drafts in 2025. I was spending stupid amounts of money to get him, and I was happy to do that. But if there were ways that I knew within those individual micro markets that individuals weren't going to bid particularly high, I was more than happy to, scrape off a few extra dollars or a few extra percentage points to ensure that I can then make a secondary bid on a secondary player who probably turned out to be more impactful for my roster than Trevor Etienne was in 2025. But that's not really the point, right? It's more so just trying to become more knowledgeable and more mindful of who you're playing against. And I think, or at least I hope, that's what I'm doing with the real world examples that I provide to others with our content creation, because so much of our existence is so isolating. And I think we don't do a good enough job trying to expose ourselves to what others are going through. And I don't even mean that from like an empathetic lens. I mean that literally just to be like, if you have a good understanding of what your opponents are doing, it'll make you better. And we don't do that enough. And I think that the waiver example is just a small one, but I agree with you. I think 100% of the time, I'm going to overbid on the players that I want, especially in those crucial waiver moments coming right after a rookie draft versus, a week 8 random pickup of Olamide Zaccheaus because I need a wide receiver 60 to 80 to plug into my wide receiver 3 or something like that, which is also important. I'm not playing that down. I'm just, the two instances aren't equal in my mind in terms of like how I'm positioning them in my head.
Yeah, and you can almost get in front of Olamide Zaccheaus.
Exactly.
Right? You can build that into your process in season. It almost feels like there's an elite asset component to these waiver claims. Not that the players themselves are elite, but that the opportunity there is so uncommon that it's worthy of being chased, especially like after the first waiver bid, post rookie draft or whatever. You asked what I draw from in my life, and it's so experiential for me. So I took over this mill that's 800,000 square feet, and I was told, hey, can you save $60,000 this year in energy on this property? I'm like, yeah, probably. Let me go take a look at it, right? And so I took a few trips out to this mill in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I found 150 failed HVAC systems out of 900. I found that the way that those systems were operating was illogical, maybe negligent, and a lot of different components were broken. I saw lights that were on in the parking lot in the middle of the day. I found structural issues. The roof was in bad shape. Like the list went on and on. It was literally, thousands of items that I presented to my team of here's all the negligence, here's all the waste, here's all the inefficiency, and here's the prioritization of all of these issues that I think we should be tackling over the next 2 years, right? And a lot of that was understanding best practices, understanding efficiencies, right? Getting the fundamentals down to where they're rote, to where they are so well ingrained in the process of a system of this almost living thing, this campus, this 800,000 square foot campus that was formerly a mill for, I think it was Levi Jeans or something. that's where my mind is. It's about understanding the fundamentals of Dynasty, going back, I'm going all the way back to 2002 now in my studies to understand the cyclical nature and the how positions behave over decades, how the dynasty landscape does, how valuations shift, how production is morphing through the positions and what is causing them. Like what are the fundamental causes of the way that this organism, which is like the timeline of fantasy points scored, of valuations, of predictability throughout those positions, how does that operate? What is the natural law and order of fantasy football so that I can create that basis of understanding and then I can manipulate it? I find a lot of folks, once they get their feet under them as dynasty managers or as maybe fantasy football analysts, they're trying to chase the next big thing. And that's worthwhile. It's absolutely something we should be pursuing. But I think a reintegration of the fundamentals of a deeper understanding year over year of how those are applied is going to set the table for a better manipulation of those trends. And I think we miss that too frequently. I think that we push too hard forward without looking backward. Is that something that you ever do? Do you ever look towards history to figure out what has happened previously and why so that you can apply it moving forward in fantasy?
Yes, I think like that's one of the biggest things that drives me as an isolated manager. Like I do believe that there is this appeal to novelty that is kind of stuck within the game that will always be there, and even more so now we live in a space where there's just so much analysis behind the game, right? There are so many voices, there are so many places to acquire data, there are so many websites to hear different opinions, and all of that drives noise that unfortunately is in its own right probably morphing what that general understanding of the game looks like because people are so misdirected of where they want to go. So for me, I do believe right now in this like almost antithesis to exposure therapy where I want to kind of drive my narrative based off of everything that has occurred before me or before now to then drive what is going to happen in the future rather than the idea that all these different voices have a better understanding of what the future has entailed and what has actually occurred in the past. And that's just naturally where my head goes. Does that kind of align with where you're at?
I think there's a lot of room for interpretation, right? And for the human experience of that. And that's the part of fantasy football that I don't think we've solved very well, is a multifaceted approach to the fundamentals. A lot of times we hear folks from a financial background, right? Or a data and analytics background, or maybe a film background, like they were a scout or they played in college or whatever. Those are such narrow views of any sort of game. Like zoom way out. Like if you're playing Ticket to Ride, it doesn't mean you have to be a train conductor. You know, you don't have to be a city planner. That helps, I guess, but it's a game of psychology, right? So like, why are we um, gatekeeping the fact that there are so many other perspectives, right? Like I try to bring ecology and physics in at times and to great failure. Like I spent so much time, Jake, trying to figure out how to overlay bug reproductive rates to attrition rates because looking at it from my frame of view, like, oh, there's a lot of like commonality here. Maybe I should explore this, right? And that's good. But more often than not, you find that okay, well, this environment, this ecosystem doesn't align closely enough, right? There's nothing wrong with that. What I'm saying is that there are different perspectives. There could be legal folks, there could be biologists, there could be tax assessors, dog groomers. Like there's so many different ways to approach this game that I think are fascinating. And bringing more of those folks in to establish those fundamentals this time of year, that's what creates the secret sauce of innovation in this space.
I completely agree. We had a conversation. I didn't get to partake in the interview itself, but we did actually bring in a lawyer onto Dynasty Underdog last year, I believe it was. His name's Will Dennison. He plays in one of the crazier leagues that we happen to play in. We talk about all the time. It's a 36 team, basically 3 copy of each player league. And he provided a lot of fantastic framework of how he takes his everyday life within the law world into dynasty trade negotiations. Like a lot of law work that I don't think a lot of people understand is negotiating. Like they are very much salespeople of the ilk of trying to best understand what or how can I leverage this opportunity into the best outcome. That best outcome might be very far from my actual ability to acquire or obtain, and to be able to get there at some point or scale based off of either communication, the actual offers that I provide, or whatever it might be, is a fantastic range to be able to manipulate or get closer to that end all goal. And so much of what we do from an individual dynasty perspective is driven by data or is driven by film biases, to your point. And I agree that a lot of the game that we play is actually psychological. Like shout out to Leo Pasiga. He has been a front runner of how important it is to be psychologically almost invested in your league mates, being able to properly journal and document their processes, what they're doing across the leagues, because that aspect of the game, I do think gets minimized because folks think that they're getting ahead of everybody else with already pretty easily accessible data that's already out there. By all means, how you manipulate or uh, interpret that data is going to be potentially up to you or up to the people that you're listening to. But by all means, at the end of the day, the general breadth of data is still relatively limited to what we all have access to. Like no one is really interacting with some new metric outside of the number butts 10 that not a lot of other people are interacting with, right? And so being mindful of that and understanding what those nuances of kind of the human element of the game are, I think is where I drive a lot of intent or interest in trying to best kind of figure out new ways that we can start to navigate around just like people interaction.
So Koopa in the chat says he was just playing Ticket to Ride tonight. That's awesome, man. We've got a couple of really good questions in the chat that we're going to get to in just a second, but you touched on something that I've been struggling with, this NPSS. I don't know what to do with gained data edges. Like obviously employ them, right? Like, but there's more to that than I think I've dug into, and I'm interested in your perspective because there should be a compounding effect. If we're going to get dorky for 1 second, a lot of the wide receiver or pass catcher predictive metrics that you see out there in the general fantasy space, they have an R squared or a correlation of like 77-ish% to fantasy scoring. So their model explains 77% of how points are scored at the pass catcher positions. We are at like 93, 94% correlation to explain fantasy points with the NB10 score. And this isn't like to smell my own farts. What I'm wondering is like, what do you do with that gap, man? Because that's what, like 17% edge that we have over the folks who are paying attention, right? Much less the general market. Numbers but score aside, when you have a informational or data-driven advantage, what do you do with that in this game?
Yeah, I think it's really all down to manipulation and trying to be as efficient with that manipulation as you possibly can. I think there is this element within this game that if you come at it too strong and you try and almost be too aggressive with whatever that piece of information is, like why are you trying to acquire X player at 120% of their value or whatever it might be, like that doesn't make any sense. Why would you be trying to do that? And then therefore people get weirdly defensive and don't want to navigate those waters. I think that is where I try my best to almost shield any expectations or even kind of provide any additional context to my intent. Like so much of this game is kind of a masquerade in the sense where you don't want folks to really understand the general intentions, but yet you do want to be able to provide some form of clarity or transparency of what this looks like. Just because I was honest about this individual step, or maybe even my next two steps, doesn't mean that the third step of this transgression needs to be, mapped out to everybody. And I think that is where I kind of come along with the general way that I play, especially as a content creator. Because I do think that as much as I hate that terminology, to your point before, like, why don't I have a larger backing or anything like that? Like, with Dynasty Underdog, I don't think any of us really put forth any effort into trying to expand the brand. And, maybe that's good or bad. I have no idea, but it just doesn't matter to us. Like, we're really just creating content for other people like us, which is probably why we have the community that we do. It's just a bunch of dorks who really love Dynasty Fantasy Football and want to continue to get better at it. Right. So for me, I do feel like the avenue or the pathway or the roadmap, whatever you want to call it, is really about being able to provide kind of this understanding of what a portion of the roadmap looks like without folks really understanding what the final step is. And that comes from even these types of conversations, unfortunately.
Yeah, I love that, man. As a content creator, I really want the things I'm proposing to work, right? Because I do them. I'm not proposing strategies or moves that I don't actually make. Yeah, I think a really good one. We did a predictions channel in the Discord and on the Superflex Super Show, and I predicted that Ricky Pearsall is going to finish as the wide receiver 15 in points per game, minimum 100 routes, right? I'm trying to buy Ricky Pearsall right now. It wasn't just like, I think he could be good, and hoping that this comes true. This is a player that I'm actively hunting out, right? I was also recommending or saying that the wide receiver 24 in 2026 is going to outscore the wide receiver 17 of this year, of 2025. That's a tier that I'm hunting out. I'm not, just saying these things. I'm trying to do them. I'm actually not shielding my moves at all in my leagues because I really truly believe in them and I want to be the test subject. I think as people who don't create content, y'all have the ability to hide your moves a little bit better. And I would so encourage you to do that because it would probably be more effective, right? We're a little bit hamstrung by the fact that we have the, I don't know what it is, the ego, the hubris to come on a mic every week and say, you guys should do this. Well, we have to do it then, right? To be proven that this is the correct move. And you don't get to hide your moves as easily when you're telling 1,000 people that that's the thing that you're going to be trying to do each week,
100%. And it's one of the things that I try my best. And you were bringing this up before, like, how do I come up with so much quote unquote like evergreen content? And I think so much of it is based off of previous content. Like, there is so much to take on from just being accountable of the things that you're doing within your leagues and also the things that you say within this element of a podcast. I think a lot of the reality or the charade that people almost put up in front of their content is that they could say anything on any given week and then they don't come back to it. They don't come back to the idea that, they had, for whatever reason, a player ranked ahead of another player in their rookie prospect profiles. Like, I am willing to eat that. I'm willing to say that I am imperfect. I'm willing to state that there are flaws in what I'm doing, because if I can't state that publicly, then I can't state that probably personally. And if I can't state that personally, then I'm just going to continue to be the same shitty person that I was in the past. And I won't be better as a Dynasty Fantasy Football manager, or I won't be better as a content creator, or I won't be better as a person. And all of that has to be some type of like intrinsic motivation that you have, or else it's gone, right? Like, there's no other reason to do except just to create. And I think that that is unfortunately a common occurrence in the space. And this isn't me trying to negate a lot of the work that happens. It's just more so we aren't mindful enough of the things that we say on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis, or whenever our content comes out, to state to the public, you know what, I goofed, or you know what, I missed something in my process. And I think, to your point, that's where we gain a lot of edges as, I think, content creators, in all honesty, is we are even more so present in this process because we are constantly thinking about what we want to create next. And by doing so, where's the best way to go? But either analyze a new set of data or remodel that data to better fit or try and grasp whether or not this mental narrative that you have is actually going to happen moving forward, whether or not the things that are happening within your leagues are happening the way that you predicted in the offseason, whether or not the trades that you are breaking down in a singular episode are actually happening the way that you said that they would after you absolutely annihilated one of your listeners on an episode. Maybe I did that, maybe I didn't, I don't know. But like all of that is really important, I think, to this general process of how we better ourselves, but also continue to almost gain some form of edge within the game itself while also still being incredibly transparent.
Yeah, let's apply some of those concepts to a couple questions we've got in the chat here. Something that I think has been established more as a theme as we look back to 2025. As we go, look back to 2025, target shares for wide receiver and running backs dropped. Running back target share dropped to like a 15-year low, like a really low. Wide receiver, it was down, I think, 8 years, while target share increased at tight end pretty dramatically, right? So the question is, are you going to shift your roster structure to combat this, or is this just a blip? And before we answer that, I think we did have a follow-up question by Lefty Joe here, who was wondering the same thing. How long does this meta in the NFL last before teams shift back from too high safeties to combat the heavier sets that a lot of teams have pivoted to? So let me kick this off first by framing the context. Is that what you saw in the data that you looked at, in your experience, in your film review? How are offenses applying heavier sets? Is it strictly tight ends? What is happening in the NFL that is causing this reduced target share to running backs and wide receivers and this increased target share to tight ends?
Yeah, I do think that that is a one-to-one translation of what I am seeing in film. And it also doesn't help too. And I think this, unfortunately, is just kind of a relative bias that occurs. But the more successful teams in the NFL this year, even more so, that was more transparent. So when I look at offenses like Seattle, when I look at offenses like Denver, even though they don't particularly overuse or provide a ton of target share to the tight ends, we're talking about overexposure to tight end snap share. And so like a lot of what we are going to be able to derive, I think more often than not, and this just unfortunately happens in the game, is that within these small windows, when teams are successful in the NFL, other teams pick up those responses and I think unfortunately become almost monotonous, right? This is how trends die more often than not. And we now will probably find some form of adaptation next year where offenses and as well as defenses will continue to morph and change. And I think we get stuck in the mentality that because this thing has occurred in this small window, that it will also continue to occur for an extended period of time. When, to your point before, I don't believe from everything that I've seen that history allows me to translate that from an analytic perspective to reoccur at the same extreme as it did this past year.
So I went back to 2002 and I looked at this. I looked at good years and bad years for literally every single position. And how long do these things last, right? So when we have a great tight end year, what is the runway there? When, so on and so forth. Quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, good and bad. And I found that the longest runway for any trend was exactly 2 seasons. We do not have 3 years of this dynamic playing out to where one position is fundamentally performing better for an extended period of time, right? That led me to the conclusion that I need to be buying in an optimistic way, whichever positions were down, whichever archetypes within positions were down. And so when I see something like the wide receiver 17 through 24 was the lowest it's ever been since 2002, that tells me that's an outlier, right? And not only is it an outlier, but you see traditionally about 110% bump in production over average the next year, right? And so we're going to get a swell at that position if we're to believe history. And so I did this at every single position. I can share the numbers in the Discord. I'm happy to do it in the Dynasty Underdog Discord as well. But that was really telling to me, just to reaffirm that if you have a strategy that was sound and it didn't work last year, don't leave it. You've already paid the price of getting into that strategy, right? So let's say you were really buying into the concept of pass catching running backs, right? And Alvin Kamara types aside, the elder statesman of the position, if you believe that pass catching running backs are going to be a difference maker, you should be buying in more, right? This is the time to double down, triple down if you can, knowing that your runway is probably only extending one more year at most. Have some diamond hands in your strategies. Have a longer view in the room than your opponents. I think that's something that we've almost been encouraged to be day traders, and this isn't a day trading market. We just kind of pretend it is, don't we?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I see it both ways. I do think that there is an element of day trading that actually is incredibly beneficial from how to best put this. There are elements within the roster that I think you should be able to think to yourself are more maneuverable than they need to be. And I think a lot of people believe that when they play this game and they latch on to, for instance, a very well developing rookie player. I'll call out a couple from last year that I think folks were unwilling to get off of when they were successful. But like Jakejake-A, Tyler Warren are two great examples, right? Even Woody Marks had a couple of windows where you probably could have gotten off of him and felt very good about it yourself. The issue here is that those individual assets, regardless of what they end up doing in their professional careers, because that isn't important to me, are realistically not going to outperform the already proven assets that will continue to perform over a longer window. And there are going to be anomalies by all means, and I'm completely conscientious of that. I'm aware that I will sometimes miss and I will lose out on those anomalies. But the fact is that I am more likely than not going to continue to re-hit on the other assets. And so there were windows, for instance, to get into the Joe Burrows. There were windows, for instance, to get into Justin Jefferson last year, and there will continue to be. There were windows to get into A.J. Brown last year for incredibly cheap. And it's just like, these are the things that I think as general dynasty players, people move away from because they're so caught up in the novelty of the game itself that when they day trade or they think that they're day trading, they don't see the elements of what realistically doesn't have as much as a ceiling as they believe it does. Because if you actually look at these tools that a lot of us like to make fun of, like a keep trade cut or different types of trade calculators, they actually give us a great understanding of what quote unquote ceiling value looks like. And when players reach anywhere in that 2.5 to 3 first range in such a quick momentum or movement, that is when, in my opinion, you need to get off of them as fast as possible so you can get into the assets that will realistically sit there for a longer period of time. And I like to say realistically here because once again, there will be misses, but you will most likely hit in that situation back into, like, I think there was a chance for you to probably get out of Jakejake-A and probably like a couple of seconds or even maybe a first and get into Joe Burrow, depending on your league's micro markets, right? Like there were so many ways to get into Joe Burrow last year where you will be in a significantly better place in this upcoming season than you were last year. But so many folks are concerned about the point scoring aspect in those small windows to not even think about the opportunity of what 2026 looks like, because we do believe in this, I think, assimilation of we need to win this year because that's what I'm paying my money for. But that's inherently, in my opinion, not the best way to look at Dynasty Fantasy Football because I'm trying to play in much larger windows.
Yeah, the thing that kind of gets lost sometimes is a strategy should win. It should be viable to win every year, right? You should have a strategy that is evergreen year over year. Yes, you can establish contending windows where you're better than other years. But if you're not creating an evergreen strategy, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. I think back to Peter Howard at PA Howdy. Gosh, what, like 6 or 7 years ago, I was listening to him, and he made the comment almost offhand that the top 15 players in Dynasty matter, and that's about it. Everything else is window dressing, right? And so those players should be removed from the day trading market, however you want to access it. That's not a real thing anymore. They should cease to exist in a day trading market. because it's an unregulated market, right? You have the choice to introduce or remove any of the players that you have, or to not make an offer, right? That's your participation in the removal of your opponent's players. I was doing a study on this too, as a total aside. I'm glad that we don't have much of a structure to this conversation. I
Me
did a
too.
study, Jake, where I pulled like 100 teams who are in the bottom three of their league in a safe leagues, like very basic super flex format, right? What is the every person dynasty manager doing when they have a failed team, a bottom three team, right? And the trends are amazing that I'm seeing. I'm seeing a huge investment in tight end, which doesn't make any sense to me as a bottom three team. I'm seeing 1.5 of the top 6 quarterbacks removed from the fantasy scoring universe on these bottom three teams. And so what I'm looking at with this study that I'm doing is, yes, what is the anatomy of a quote unquote bad team? Like, what do they look like from a value standpoint, from a roster construction standpoint, point scoring potential? And then I'm looking at what has been taken away from the market by those players existing on that roster, and how can I further manipulate what's just happening on the withering vines of my dynasty leagues, right? I think looking at spaces where there are voids, right, where people aren't necessarily looking, that's a shadow, really, to better understand what are the good players, what are the potential top 15 players that are on dead teams, and how can I manipulate that? How much more impactful is it if you found out that 2 of the top 6 tight ends are removed from your fantasy universe on average in a traditional superflex non-tight end premium league? Gosh, that really makes Brock Bowers and Trey McBride a lot more valuable, doesn't it?
100%. Yes.
And so I think the manipulation of those types of concepts as well are where we can get really significant edges, like outside of whatever your generic strategy is, right? Like having those base understandings is critically important. And that's how I apply it, going all the way back to the question of like, how do we counter these heavy 2 tight end sets? I don't buy into tight end right now. I lean towards the gaps, right? I chase the top 15 elite assets, whatever they look like in my scoring format. And then I'm looking at the voids. What was left unsaid or unscored in my leagues? Can I get into a very similar profile to that more cheaply than the market should dictate? And it's not to be proven right on Devontae Smith, who I love. It's to eventually convert 2 Devontae Smiths into 1 Jamar Chase when I get it right, to get that Joe Burrow when he's hurt, when you have Jackson Dart and DK Metcalf who's doing well in like week 4. Like that's really the goal, isn't it? Is to facilitate your strategies using the NFL dynamics to sharpshoot those top 15 assets if and when they become available, because they inevitably do, don't they?
Yes, and honestly, I'll never forget. There was a beautiful episode between you and John discussing your startup that the two of you shared, and how you basically went off the rails from the the overarching conversations that occurred between picks. And I'll never forget John being a little disappointed that you went after, I believe it was Brees Hall,
Mhm.
and you were just like, "Well, here's the thing: is that there are going to be elements or windows for Brees Hall to get off of. And the fact is, whether or not we like Brees Hall, there are other people within this league that do like Brees Hall. And the fact is, I believe your counter was basically like that exact point. We can use Brees Hall and whatever that additional asset is or assets are, and package them into something significantly more elite to Brees Hall, and have that position now in our starting 10 or 11, whatever it might be significantly stronger moving forward. That is what Brees Hall is to this team. That is the benefit and power play to why he is on the roster, and significantly more valuable than, someone like, I don't know, Jalen Waddle or who else was in there in that ADP. And I think that caveat is so important that I don't think a lot of people rationalize when they're talking through this game itself, because so much of it, to even your Devontae Smith perspective, it's like we think of these assets as things that we have to like, or we have to see larger scale usage for within our lineups. And sometimes they do hit our lineups. That is a reality, right? You might not have been able to sell Brees Hall by week 1. Okay, that happens. So you start Brees Hall. That's okay. That's not going to ruin your team. There are significantly worse assets than Brees Hall. But the reality is that if there's 2 or 3 great weeks for Brees Hall, and now his value is actually heightened from when you drafted him at, let's say, 6 or 7 positions lower than his normal ADP, then guess what? You made a slight profit off of Brees Hall, and you were able to get into the asset that you were actually aiming to get into. What maybe that is at that point in time, Christian McCaffrey plus or whatever it might be, right? Like there were ways to manipulate Brees Hall's value at different points of the season that I think were beneficial in any particular direction you go. And I think that's the biggest thing, that when we talk about being able to take away like elements of what's happening in the NFL to then valuing them moving forward, it's, to your point, there are going to be windows of individual values for players that maybe you don't necessarily even love yourself, but take advantage of them, package them properly, and then get into the assets that you do want to get into. Because I am very much of the mindset that I'd much rather overspend on the top 15 players than even marginally spend market on a player who's not going to actually impact my roster. And that's just kind of where my head goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Hope I get this name right. Adestantres, Brees Hall contributed to a chip in week 17. That's the other thing. I mean, when you get those types of mid-tier assets, you're riding variance, right? So you don't know how it's going to go. There's an illusion of control with these types of assets of, I know that they're going to peak at this point, or they're going to have this type of market by week 17. We don't know. With like the vast, like more than 90% of dynasty assets, we don't know. And it's about embracing the fact that we don't know and utilizing that in ways that our opponents are either unsure of positively or negatively, right? And another one here, packaging players is a good way to get around that, right? Like, hey, what do you want with this player? I don't know. Package them up, right? Like, so I think that those are both viable. Thank you, Estantres, and loving the choice of vocabulary. This is why I love you, Jake. It's like you think differently than a lot of folks. We talked a little bit about the in-season push and pull of the dynasty market right now. I've talked about where I think we should be countering the market. I think nearly ad nauseum already this NPSS, and it's not even February yet. Where is the dynasty market pushing and pulling, and where are you like leaning away and leaning into those flows?
Yeah, I think general QB 7 to QB 12 points per game scoring quarterbacks are where folks are transitioning away from and are happy to kind of lose value on those folks. I've already found a bunch of windows to get into those types of assets in my leagues, and being able to even corner the market in a particular way where the majority of builds now, I'm thinking of one league in particular where I've basically now have 6 starting quarterbacks, and every other team in the league has around 2 to 2.5 starting quarterbacks. Like, sure, my 6 aren't amazing, but they are definitely impacting the league. When you think of if those 6 finish in the top 15 of scoring quarterbacks, which I think on that particular roster, I have Herbert, Burrow, Shuck. So thank you for that. Dart, Mayfield, and Goff. It's like, it's not beautiful, but that's making a pretty drastic impact on the market, right? There are just so many ways in which I try to add liquidity to my rosters. And like, this is one of the ways that I try to counter liquidity by the idea that I am underselling the liquidity, because we believe that draft capital right now is on the bottom scale of what that value looks like, and which is very much true. The narratives for individual players is going to continue to increase that draft capital. I believe in that. But at the same time, I believe that there are going to be assets like a Jared Goff, like a Dak Prescott, that will be in this window that you can happily take advantage of, and folks will undersell because they very much are of the mindset that Dak Prescott's value will never reach 3 firsts ever again. He's a 32-year-old quarterback. Who cares if he's a top 10 scorer? And that's where my head wants to always go. Additionally, to your point before, and this isn't me mimicking it, I have truly gone after wide receivers. My builds have always been relatively wide receiver heavy. I've always talked about that. All of my builds that won last year have at least 4 elite wide receivers. That goes against everything that you believe in. And this isn't me being like, oh, well, I won my leagues. I didn't beat Tommy though. So very much Tommy in a league where we're in together and I have, my ideal build. Maybe it doesn't turn in as successful, but the fact is that I know that countering the ways in which I did in those specific leagues was successful, and I know why it was successful. So all of that to be said, like, I do believe that wide receiver and quarterback value right now is just grossly undervalued, and I've been trying my best to get into it however I can.
I love the shout out on both positions. So, looking back at those studies I did, literally every single one of the top 24 quarterbacks produced better after a down year. Every single one of them. Not one scores worse on average. That tier that you identified, the low end QB1s, average a 9 to 10% improvement the next year. That's significant, in my opinion. That's like, we should be paying attention to that. That's awesome. Looking at wide receivers, it's a little bit different, man. The top, I don't know, 12 wide receivers, they tend to do better, right? Slightly lower in terms of improvement, 13 through 24. And then at wide receiver 28, there's a dip where we actually see decreased production from wide receiver 29 all the way to wide receiver 69, decreased production after a bad year. And so I have concerns that maybe that tier is going to dip even further and it goes way up at wide receiver 70. And so some of the themes that we talk about, we've been talking about for years, where Chase Elites, that seems to be evergreen, at least to this year. Targeting that wide receiver 13 through 28 seems to be a pretty good bet historically. And then punting the position entirely, like punt the position entirely all the way to your waivers, to wide receiver 70 and beyond, because that's where the next spike is. You don't want to be caught with your pants down with the wide receiver 44, right? That's not going to help you, especially if they do worse this year, right? Because what you're doing is you're hurting your roster construction, right? And so I think if the market is still tepid at that tier of wide receivers 3 through 5, wide receiver 36 through 62 or whatever that is, I still think we should probably be selling there. I'm going with that flow of selling. However, I'm trying to consolidate upward, like Estantres was saying, into a wide receiver 2. I think if I can trade 2 wide receiver 3s and get a wide receiver 2, I'm probably doing that this year, Jake.
I'm right there with you. I'm a firm believer that that's how you should be managing wide receivers in general. Like, I just don't really ever try and play the value game with that wide receiver 3 tier, and even like low end wide receiver 2 tier. It's just not somewhere that I need to be making those excessive adjustments. And I think that that's where people lose a ton of value. I think about players who had some really, really exciting talk around them, i.e. like a Josh Downs. And then, or right now, this offseason, Wan'Dale Robinson. Like, I absolutely love those 2 individual players. Like, I think they're incredible football players. Very exciting. But that shouldn't blind me in the fact that I don't want to ever start either of them in my dynasty lineup, right? Like, if I have to, I will. But the fact is that there are so many better avenues and directions to go from them than to be using them. And so, like, for me, there's a best practice aspect to this. And you brought up day trading before, and I think that they are kind of those key cogs to why I do believe that day trading is still a very vital element to this game, because there are these almost like inauthentic or artificial narratives that drive value for a lot of these players. Like Josh Downs last offseason didn't have to play a snap. Like everyone was just talking about him like his career was going to transform. And somehow or another, from like a quarterback perspective, there was actually better quarterback play in Indianapolis. But the fact is that Michael Pittman was healthy. Alec Pierce defined his role significantly better. And Josh Downs wasn't particularly 100% healthy. Plus Tyler Warren was there taking massive target share. So guess what? Josh Downs levels out and he stays to be the same asset as what he was prior to that. That all to say, it's like these types of windows occur for so many wide-scale wide receivers every single offseason. And it's really important to be able to get in and out of them at the right time. Like, I do believe, to your point about Ricky Pearsall, that there is a place to get into Ricky Pearsall. And I also believe that there will definitely also be a place to get out of Ricky Pearsall after you've acquired him. I don't think, even with his top 15 finish, that Ricky Pearsall should necessarily be on your roster at the end of 2026. And that's not because I don't believe in Ricky Pearsall, the physical specimen or the athlete. It's just I would rather get into other profiles that aren't Ricky Pearsall in the longer term.
Yeah, I'm experimenting with something with the NB10 score where I start with the first 3 weeks of data, right? And then I do a rolling 3 weeks throughout the season. I'm working through like a ceiling score through a 3 week window to show the capacities of wide receivers to capture their best environment throughout a season, right? And eventually throughout their career. I've got 4 years worth of data, maybe 5, of wide receivers right now that I can apply the NB10 score to. And I think that that's part of it, is what is the potential ceiling of these wide receivers, so that when we get the right environment, we can pounce on it and we can say like, all right, Cooper Kupp looks pretty good, but when Matt Stafford comes to town, he's going to be a 430-point scorer, right? That's what Ricky Pearsall represents to me. That's why I'm making that bet, is his ceiling score was with AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb, like those types of players. And when that happens, I want to honor it. Yes, it can go terribly wrong. This could be a stupid bet. I could look really dumb, right? But if you're to believe predictive metrics, if you're to believe that this R squared is accurate and this is reflective of fantasy points scored, we should probably be looking at ceiling as opposed to what they do over the course of a season, as counterintuitive as that sounds.
I don't disagree with that. I think my counter argument is really just about what the asset looks like in its entirety. Like, being able to understand what that ceiling is incredibly important and should be capitalized on. But I do believe, almost in a similar narrative to what I was saying with Tyler Warren and Emeka Egbuka in their rookie year, I believe that there's a time and place to be able to truly capitalize off of that ceiling output, and also understand that, especially in an offense like San Francisco, that is incredibly, incredibly inconsistent in the aspect of how their pass catchers perform, which we unfortunately saw with both Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel over the extension of their career with Kyle. Probably does a lot of cocaine. Shanahan, like, that is where my mind goes and is concerned with. Like, once again, I went to the University of Florida. I have a soft spot for Ricky Pearsall. He came to the University of Florida in, I guess, technically his 5th year, really shined out, became almost like a superstar for a very, very middling team. And there are aspects to those types of, breakouts that I think stick to people's hearts. It did for me. I happen to have a lot of Ricky Pearsall. So please feel free, if you're in a league with me where I have one, I am happy to listen to an offer for Ricky Pearsall. But that all being said, I do think that so much of this is really about capitalizing off of that ceiling output and turning it into something that is truly more consistent.
So Jay, with the comment, Jake likes Ricky's QB, so he's in on Pearsall. All right, so here's how I compound quarterbacks. I assume that they're built into the environment of the analytics that I'm looking at. I look at a wide receiver's snap share, their targets per game, yards per route run, first read target share, and first downs per route run. A lot of that is environmental, right? And I think that we capture enough of the QB's competency, floor, and ceiling potential in those metrics that I don't see a need to boost a wide receiver based on their quarterback situation. I know that, like, when it gets really bad, there's a threshold, right? It's not super well defined. JJ McCarthy flirted with it this year. Yeah. Jake Browning was one of the anchors of that competency threshold. But, like, for the most part, I mean, there's 30-ish quarterbacks running around in the NFL right now that can stay above that competency line. And unfortunately, a couple of wide receivers just get the shit kicked out of them because they don't have enough talent throwing them a football. Do you take quarterback into consideration when you're evaluating wide receivers? And if so, how do you do that?
No, I don't. Honestly, like I'll never forget during the 2024 window of prospect profiling, Malik Neighbors was just that wide receiver one for me, right? Like, and it's probably not the best example, but the fact is that he came into a very, very terrible environment in New York. There was basically no love lost or for Daniel Jones. And that was, I will be honest, I am a Giants fan, unfortunately, was born into it. I very much had no concern with being able to draft Malik Neighbors and knowing that he'll still have a very successful career. It had nothing to do with Daniel Jones's performance. Like, I just don't believe in that narrative. Like, there are going to be, to your point, where the QB performance is legitimately that terrible, where it does have that impact. And until I see that from an individual quarterback, then I'll have that conversation. But I just don't believe that there are enough starting quarterbacks in the NFL, to your point, for that to be an overarching concern. Like, for instance, that was a narrative around Tedero and McMillan, right? I, by all means, happen to have a pretty strong opinion on Bryce Young being significantly more competent than the mass media or Gen Pop of the industry believe of Bryce Young, but that's a completely different conversation. Tedero McMillan wasn't going to be impacted by Bryce Young. If anything, Tedero McMillan was going to be impacted by Tedero McMillan's weaknesses. And thankfully, he outshined those and became a significantly more impactful player in his rookie year than I think a lot of people gave him credit for. And so that is kind of like where my head would go with regards to how wide receivers are impacted by their quarterbacks.
Ted McMillan is interesting because I was so down on him that he wasn't worth a first round pick in my mind going out of the rookie draft. Right. So, like, I guess I'm a hater. I don't know. I was really out on him. I preferred Tyler Shuck over Ted McMillan, leaving the rookie drafts. However, once we got the data points of what he was capable of, I changed my tune and I was buying him in as many places as I could on the way up, right? How do you do that? How do you change your priors? What is it that gets you to change your opinion when you're entrenched well below consensus, let's say, on a player or asset, to say, like, no, in fact, I'm not only wrong, but I need to put my money where my mouth is and actually get more of this player on my roster because I had zero exposure before.
Yeah, especially for me as someone who is definitely more primarily film dependent. Not that I don't use analytics, but I would say that I am primarily film dependent, or at least that's where I base a lot of my own biases. Sadly, it's probably the worst place to build them. I would say for me, it really is about understanding the historical narrative around the player itself from a film perspective. And I think Tetaroa, I think Luther Burden fell into this as well in this past window, where a lot of folks got so caught up in the immediacy impact of their collegiate career. Basically, me stating the last rolling 1 year window of understanding what that player looked like and not understanding that there was more on tape that was available to us than just those 12 months or just those 6 months of games. And so for both of those players, for instance, I was pretty skeptical of the general draft capital that you had to invest into either of them, just given the circumstances of where they were falling, because there were other assets in and around that area that I was just more willing to invest in. Like, I was happily willing to invest in Colston Loveland over Tedero McMillan. By all means, that looks great now, but there were many windows this regular season that I felt like an idiot, right? And so there that does occur, and I'm completely conscientious of that. I think, like, the big thing for me is being able to attribute what you're trying to gain away from the player itself, understand how it translates, and then once you see it has translated, even in the smallest of windows at the NFL level, knowing that as long as they're not going up against, a bottom five corner, for instance, for the majority of those reps, that there is a more likely chance than not that they will probably repeat that. And then being able to then mesh or pair that with analytics will only continue to help drive that impact of being able to kind of get ahead of the market in those circumstances. And there is someone in the comments, Istin Trey's, I believe you pronounced it also differently than how I just did. So we'll just say what I just said, and hopefully he'll know who I'm talking about. But he was incredibly ahead of market with Luther Burden. Like, he was someone who, if he did not get him after the rookie draft, there was some negative commentary about Luther, especially with some of his preseason injuries. I think he had some soft tissue issues. There were windows to easily get into him for pretty accessible fees. Like, there were folks getting rid of him for 2 seconds, right? Like, there were folks getting rid of him for whatever it might have been. And so being able to kind of get ahead that early is definitely something that I want to try and do now before folks even see the NFL tape, because I do think that that is still in existence. I think we can gain some of that information within the prospect profiling that we do, and we just have to be a little bit more assured in our decision making. What about you? Like, how are you trying to tackle those spaces?
I love relying on data because it's a crutch, right? It makes me feel better. I can blame the numbers if they were wrong, not I was wrong, right? But what I typically do is I flee to proven profiles. I traded Luther Burden and a second for Devontae Smith in one league because I had no wide receivers. I play so minimalist that Luther Burden was an anchor to me earlier in the season. And I knew what I was giving up because he was performing well in the NB10 score, except for snap share. He had like 3-something yards per route run earlier in the season. He looked like an elite prospect, but I had to give up on him. And so sometimes it goes the other way, where you think you have something, but the season waits for no team, right? If you have a real need and if you're built asymmetrically, sometimes you have to give up the assets you love, right? The bets that you think are going to pay off, right? And so I don't think that it's this binary, just bash the league over the head with some sort of hidden metric or some sort of like insight that other people aren't seeing. It's also about knowing when to cut bait, even on one of the rising assets. And that's a really tough thing to do. So a couple things here in the chat, just to put a bow on this. Low-key decent amount of Jaden Higgins hype too, with no established wide receiver too. I looked up the NB10 scores for Jaden Higgins. He scored a 4.26, which is a clear sell, in my opinion, one of those consumable pieces that looks a lot like other ones. And you could be wrong, right? Selling at this current market valuation. But if you're finding somebody that is willing to buy him as a wide receiver too, he doesn't really look like one compared to his peers. And Gordo's asking, was it the NB10 score that brought me in to Tet McMillan? Yeah, it was. I love being proven wrong. Like, I think that is something that makes me a decent dynasty manager. And honestly, it helps me grow as a person. I love to be wrong. I think that being wrong is something that is like worthy of gleeful discovery. Like, I think that it's a really cool thing in your world to be like shaken to your core and be like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking here with Tet McMillan? He's got, an 80% snap share and he's right at 2 yards per route run. And oh my gosh, he's the first read a third of the time in this offense. Yes, I didn't believe in Bryce Young. Yes, I didn't believe in this player, but it's not about my beliefs. This is not a game of belief. This is a game of facts. Right? How many points do they score, right? And what are the most predictable components of scoring? Well, it's these things, and this guy is doing that. So thank God I was able to get this information, because I'm clearly wrong. I'm an idiot at this part of the game. Like, there's a blind spot. This is crazy to me. And it doesn't have to be a metric that I made up. There's a lot of roadmaps where you can get this same type of information, right? And that's why I listen to you. That's why I listen to Dynasty Underdog. That's why I listen to Jakejake-A, right? There's a lot of like checkpoints along the way that are really, really helpful to test your assumptions, right?
Yeah, I agree. There is this element of being able to confine yourself to the appropriate number of data points that I think can make us more efficient as dynasty managers, versus this idea that I need to be as expansive as possible, and then delineate whether or not I want to attribute that information to my process or not. Because I do think that we are now in such a place where the content is so readily available. It's so readily available that when we listen to one thing, it offers us other options that are similar to that. I'm sure that there's a suggestion right now on the side of the screen on YouTube that has someone else doing a live stream of a Dynasty podcast. And it's like you could easily jump into that other conversation, take away some very well documented point, and think to yourself, I'm going to enact that, or
Yep.
I'm going to take that piece and maybe dial in some additional time. I just don't know if that's as beneficial as we want it to be. And so I agree with you. Like, I am very much at a place where I have basically my window or toolkit, I'll call it, of pieces that I bring into my process on a weekly basis that help me drive some of the decisions that I want to be making. And sometimes I don't listen to them. Sometimes there are pieces that I just don't believe in. And sometimes there are. Like, for instance, one of the ones that I didn't believe in, but I bought in anyway, was the Miles Sanders and AJ Dillon throw them onto your roster perspective from last year. And I believed in the logic, and therefore I believed in doing it. I enacted on it because the logical aspect of it made tons of sense to me, but I didn't believe in the player profiles. I just didn't. But that's okay, because, the cost to acquisition was totally palatable for me to be like, oh man, Tommy ruined my builds by me picking up, Miles Sanders and AJ Dillon. Like, no, that was never going to happen. And that's totally fine. Right. Like, that's not the point. It's more so like, you brought up a point. I internally was like kind of fighting against it, but I was like, you know what? Those last two roster spots can happily be those players. Like, I have no issue with those two players being those last two roster spots. Whereas I would say in the past, when I wasn't listening to you, those roster spots were significantly more, I guess, usable assets on my roster, but actually held my roster down significantly more than what I was expecting. And so that's where I feel like I've been able to adapt from, even just like quote unquote poor decisions that I've made based off of the analysts that I trust. It's like the process has actually made me better, but sometimes you just happen to have, some dead assets like an AJ Dillon, who very well could have taken better advantage of his opportunity in Philly this year. He had the opportunities and literally fumbled them away. So,
Yep.
that all being said, I don't think it was a bad shot by you. It just didn't work out the way that it could have.
I think the Dallas backfield is a fascinating case study, isn't it, Jake? Where like let's break down the backfield for a second, because there's a quarterback who is willing to throw to the running back. It's an assumed good offense and an assumed bad defense. So there's going to be a lot of offensive snaps, right? And the competition in that backfield was Javonte Williams, second rounder, coming off, I think, 2 years removed from serious knee injury, like 3.9 yards per carry, good pass catcher, but not sure what juice was left. There was Miles Sanders, who was a second round pick. Pretty similar storyline, right? Got a second contract in Carolina, pretty big contract, didn't work out, right? So dented cans at the top. Jaden Blue, fifth round rookie, who, again, pass catcher. Like a lot of similar archetypes there, right? Seventh rounder Phil Maffa, big bruiser who was injured in the preseason, unavailable. Hunter Lupke, who's a fullback.
Yep.
A lot of murkiness there. I think every single one of those players was a decent bet given their considerations, right? Considered like the odds that you have with each one of those. It's just what was cheapest. What is the cheapest way to get into that backfield? Because anyone who is proclaiming certainty that Javonte Williams is going to be good, that's total hindsight bias. There's no way that people were doing that, because that wasn't the sentiment, right? He was cheap enough to get into. You could say that he was a value, but people weren't predicting that he was going to take over that backfield. Jaden Blue was considered the likeliest candidate to take over that backfield, right? Fifth round picks have pretty terrible, like 7% odds of being a top 24 running back at any point in their career, much less their rookie year. And so that's why I was buying into Miles Sanders. It's not as a defense mechanism. It's just that the case study is so interesting. And I think that as you look at other backfields in the NFL, the Houston Texans have a very similar dynamic unfolding this non-point scoring season. And I think we still need to sharpshoot those, right? I think that's what that is. We need to be attacking the cheapest option in Houston next year, assuming they don't get a stud player. There's going to be a lot of running back movement. And then the A.J. Dillon bet was a draft capital bet. Second round running backs hang around forever, evidenced by A.J. Dillon, right? Not a good player, right? He's clearly on the tail of his career, but he still had opportunities. And so I think if we're to look at that, we should say the lesson learned for me is that, oh my gosh, A.J. Dillon, as terrible as he was, still got the chance. So we should probably still chase that, right? Whenever you see a failed second round pick or a second round pick that's sort of on the tail end of his career at the running back position, buy in if it's free.
100%. And I think to even call them quote unquote failures, like I did jokingly before, is completely unfair, because the fact is that both Miles Sanders and AJ Dillon, like I said before, had the opportunities to actually acquire a larger impact in the offense. And unfortunately, both messed them up. Like, Miles Sanders was there for the taking to have a larger role in that offense. He had that one fantastic run where he just literally doesn't have the legs to finish off the touchdown. I think he ends up like falling on like the 6 or 7 yard line. And then from that point forward, like the rest of his year is just absolutely smoked. And I think he ends up picking up an injury, goes on IR. It's done. There's nothing wrong with picking up those types of narrative stories. There were ways to get into the Rico Dowdle of last year for basically nothing. There were ways to get into, to your point, I think Rico Dowdle is a great existence of, if he falls into the Houston backfield, that feels like a pretty easy person that I would be quickly wanting to go after, considering that he's a free agent. There are also so many free agent running backs that almost all of the narratives for any of them, like we talked a little bit about on Dynasty Underdog, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, that in the right spot, we're talking about Minnesota, we're talking about Houston, we're talking about even Green Bay, given Josh Jacobs' health over the last few years. Like, there are, did you say like Arizona is also an available option? The list is long.
Mm-hmm.
Now Seattle, because of Zach Charbonnet's injury, we don't know what they're going to do with Kenneth Walker. Anyway, the list is long, that we are now in a place where free agent running backs, especially in a quote unquote limited running back class in 2026, are less likely to have as much impact by the incoming class, and therefore will most likely cycle into, even if they are singular window starting running back roles. There's just the likelihood, right? So being able to play that bet, knowing that you can basically spend borderline nothing to get into a lot of those assets, just feels like the right play. And that's definitely something that I've also been doing this offseason. Like, I think I put up a post recently, or a poll within the Superflex Super Show Discord, of whether or not someone would pay, 2 mid-thirds for Tyler Algier. I was able to acquire Tyler Algier for, I think it was the 305 and the 307. It was like,
I love it.
Cool. I kept doing it. I kept sending it out. I was like, okay, once I get one done, I'll try it in every other league that I'm in. And there is something to be said that, like, even if he doesn't hit this year and I don't get that back, I probably get back a third. I probably get back the idea of Tyler Algier having a bigger role at some point. I probably get back the idea of being able to pair him on top of something else and get into something significantly more impactful for my roster. But that all being said, the opportunity most likely will be presentable, where this narrative, this logical narrative that you have talked about for both Miles Sanders and AJ Dillon, will also be there for Tyler Algier in 2026. I can't say that that's for certain because I can't tell the future, but most likely that will be the case in 2026, just given all of the opportunity out there for the running back position.
I'm so jealous you got that done. Going into the season, August of 2025, I put out there that I thought Tyler Algier was the best value at running back across the position at any point, because he could be had for a single third, right? And I didn't know Bijan Robinson was going to be healthy all year. I didn't know Michael Penix was going to stink, right? Like, I thought that this was like a bulletproof, this is a high upside this season bet. And then we're also going to see, the NFL side, the business side come into play come January, right? And so the fact that it only cost you an extra third to get into him today, when the upside is clearly higher, right? When he has an opportunity, yes, to be a backup, like that would be a good outcome. I don't want to say that's a bad outcome. If he went to backup Amari in Hampton, awesome. I don't care. That sounds great. But he could also end up in Houston and get 300 carries next year, and that's really tough to get for 2/3. So good on you there, man. I'm going to try to do the same thing. Do you have time for one more question before we get out of here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. This one is specifically to you, so I thought we should tackle it. How's the rookie film watching going? Have you watched any Jacoby Lane yet? Who have you watched, or what are you focusing on right now?
Yeah, so I actually haven't charted anybody. Like when I say charted, I mean like actually going through my formal process. Billy and I this year, shout out to you, Dynasty Underdog. We are sharing for the first time an isolated singular sheet where we will basically now be charting all of the individual characteristics and attributes of individual players at the wide receiver, running back, and tight end position. We don't chart quarterback just mainly because that isn't our skill set. We're completely aware that that's where we have a lot of gaps. And so we are hoping to be able to basically provide a singular spreadsheet to our listeners and to the community for them to be able to take in that information in a singular place. They can then go into the details and say, this is what Jake said, this is what Billy said, and then there'll also be basically like an average score as like a DU output of being like, here's where we're both at, because we do think that that's also probably relatively valuable to some folks. Maybe they think that there's maybe some type of middle ground that should be there because I'm notorious for liking, a little bit of the smaller wide receivers that happen to play in the slot more than Billy, who loves, just giant X receivers. That's, he was a big Drake London guy. Or Treylon Burks. Those weren't guys who ever appealed to me. So being able to differentiate between the two is also really important. That all being said, because I haven't charted, I don't really feel comfortable talking about individual players just because I do feel like that aspect of the exercise is significantly more beneficial than me just watching tape. And I think that's really important because when people think of people who watch tape, they think it's just like you watch it and then you just like write down the things that you really like. Or for instance, like I know all of the great work that Tacit Assassin or Zach Reed puts into his rookie prospect profiling, where he writes these borderline novelistic write-ups of the individual players, right? They're absolutely beautiful. He reads them to the listeners on the
Hoot Nanny.
Thank you, the Hoot Nanny. Sorry, that was not coming to mind. And you're able to almost experience this otherworldly prospect profiling experience. That being said, I just don't feel like I'm in the right space to be able to kind of attribute any of like what I've seen prior to my film watching, or just like this adjunct film watching that I'm doing as kind of a way to preemptively get myself mentally prepared. But I do think that there are significantly more enticing profiles than what the media or Gen Pop is making out to be the case. And I think that's always the case. I think we go into every single one of these windows and we're like, there's nothing there. It's going to be the top 2 picks. And then that's it. Don't draft another player outside the top 2 pick. And it's like, that's kind of bullshit. But I like, there are always going to be players. And I think, this was a point I wanted to bring up before and I didn't. But the fact is that a lot of the aspects that are changing within the NFL is a delineation or a direct causation because of the changes that have occurred in the NCAA or in college football. And we still haven't been able to understand that direct impact. And I'm completely aware of this. This is all anecdotal. I can't tell you that X player would have performed 12% better if they would have played in college 3 years prior. I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is that from like an actual physical development perspective and game knowledge perspective, specifically at the quarterback position and specifically at a couple of the different wide receiver positions, or depending on where they actually are playing, like where in like what type of program they're playing at. Players are unfortunately pigeonholed into isolated roles, which basically limits them and their understanding of the game itself. And so that translation doesn't always occur as quickly as we want it to in the NFL, which doesn't mean that, for instance, and this is someone that I don't particularly like, but I am not writing him off completely, but someone like Trey Harris. I think Trey Harris had plenty of moments within his rookie year that have shown that he was going through some form of adaptation in the NFL. And that's positive to me. Like, being able to see that adaptation actually makes Trey Harris significantly more appealing to me than what I thought of him in college. But from like a prospect profiling perspective, that is one of the biggest red flags when you're looking at individual players, is about their expansiveness and also generalized understanding of what their role was. How much were they actually doing? Just because they're elite at that singular role doesn't mean that it's going to translate well into the NFL. And I think that's something that we have a really difficult time with, especially now, is what does that translation look like from college success, especially using metrics? Like, we do have a lot of great understanding of specifically like yards per route run, zone versus man. There's a lot of great work that's being done there, especially from the college football side, that people love to dive into, but it doesn't translate. It doesn't always translate one-to-one to actual NFL success. And it's really important to try and grasp while I gasp why. And that's kind of like where I'm currently trying to differentiate from just immediately diving into my rookie film watching. And I know that was really elongated. I do apologize, Tommy, but I do think that that hopefully provides a little bit more context around what's going on this offseason from just like me as an individual before I dive into this process. Because it's really important when we publish our thoughts, like, they're out there, right? They're out in the ether. You can now state that you said this in the first week of March and you were very wrong. I don't want that to happen, not because my ego is concerned with it, but it's also like I want to be fully prepared before I'm starting to publish those thoughts about those individual players.
And hold on to those too. If you have conviction, especially with, here's a dynamic that I see play out that is really difficult to navigate. You're in on a guy. He gets drafted in the 6th round. And you're like, well, shit. Was I wrong? I mean, more often than not, yeah, you're wrong. That's probably the answer. However, especially at pass catcher, if you see relatively strong, not even strong, but relatively strong underlying metrics with late drafted wide receivers, it takes 3 times as long to get their snap share up to what a highly drafted pass catcher gets just out the gate. And so track them. Jalen Coker is somebody that I'm looking at right now as a potential buy because he had really strong yards per route run, really strong first read target share. His first downs per route run are very good. His missed tackles forced are great. His drop rate has been pretty good. Like he seems like a professional wide receiver. The problem is his snap share has been really low, partially due to injury, but also he hasn't been schemed into the offense, I think, as much as he deserves. And so going into this season, he's one of those late drafted guys where it's like everything kind of looks like it's shaping up pretty good for him. And so if you do want to add one wide receiver, I traditionally say, no, don't do it. But if you really do, that's the type of profile I'm going to hunt out, is somebody that we liked, yes, and then somebody who over the years has shown a track record of being competent, right? And who just needs more opportunity. That's what I'm going to hunt out. And I'm going to let these late round wide receivers, the 6th rounders, the 5th rounders of 2026, I'm going to let them stew on someone else's roster for a couple of years. I'll pick them up if I see those positive signals so that I can be in front of when their snap share goes up.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's one of those really interesting spaces to also dive into what that actually looks like on a team by team basis. Like, for instance, this was a great narrative around someone like Jalen Royals, whose tape in college I was a relatively big fan of just because of what he could do after the catch. And then seeing him in Kansas City just, I think, aligned and made a lot of sense of, oh, there's a narrative in my head that could turn this player into something else. So what was Jalen Royals to me? He was very much a 4th round pick. If there weren't other running backs available in that window, that I was more than happy to add on to my team. But to your point, what does he do? What does he do as a value? He just flounders. So even guys that I didn't like an Ollie Gordon, that were sitting there were most likely going to be more beneficial.
Yep.
And in the same regard, you have the Brashard Smith, who's also in a same offense, same issues occurred, lower draft capital, but a running back. And we know historically with Andy Reid, rookie running backs don't particularly get a lot of love unless the whole running back room falls apart. Well, guess what? The whole running back room fell apart, and Brashard Smith still didn't have the massive impact that we wanted to from a rushing perspective, but he did from a pass catching perspective, right?
Great pass catcher. Great pass catcher. And so fast, too.
And so fast. And so what I'm looking at, especially between those two narratives, is like trying to best understand who between those two, which we clearly know who, is more likely to have a greater impact in year two on that specific team. You brought up Jarquez Hunter before. Jarquez Hunter was a fan favorite, especially from a film perspective, and he actually had relatively decent underlying metrics as well from a collegiate perspective.
Mm-hmm.
What went wrong year one? Was it him? Was it the fact that him, Blake Corum, and Kyron Williams are all the same body type, are all the same running back, but basically different tiers of that quality of running back? Or like, was it something bigger? Was it something that we just don't understand under the hood of Sean McVay and how he determines, his roster constraints or his depth chart or things like that? I don't know, but I wasn't happily getting off of Jarquez Hunter one way or another, just knowing how that running back room could devolve moving into this year. By all means, Kyron Williams ended up signing an extension, and that whole narrative is now a little bit more gone than it was at the start of last year. But those are the types of things I'm thinking about, especially during these types of windows, to try and, I guess, maneuver through these year two players, but also try and get ahead of whatever the excitement is going to be, to Tommy's point, around a round 5 through 7 wide receiver that's going to be drafted or potentially overdrafted in the upcoming rookie draft that I could potentially get out of and maybe get into Brashard Smith plus because someone's off of him or whatever it might be. But I think that's kind of how you should be navigating like these types of windows of excitement that people have over these guys who haven't played a snap yet in the NFL. All
great stuff, man. We could do this for another couple hours probably, but I want to be respectful of your time. I also want to get you back on the show as soon as possible because I love the way that your mind works. It challenges me, provides different perspectives. So keep it up, man. Why don't you plug your show and your socials one more time before we get out of here?
Sweet. Well, just first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. This was a fantastic conversation as always. Thanks for having some type of show sheet, even though I think we covered like 2 questions of the entire thing, but the conversation was still great. You can catch us at Dynasty Underdog. It's myself, Billy, and Uriah. We are on weekly on Tuesdays. Sounds funny to say this, at 8 p.m. Eastern, while this was casting at 8 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays. Unfortunately, unfortunately, the team has been sick this winter, so we've been not super consistent, but we're still pumping out a singular episode on a weekly basis. So please feel free to listen to us. That's Dynasty Underdog on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can catch me on Blue Sky at Jakejake-A.
Yeah, this is my favorite show, y'all, to listen to. I learn more from Dynasty Underdog than anything else. Highly recommend you go give it a listen if you haven't already. But let's go ahead and get out of here. While we do that, like and subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Many thanks to DLF for the platform, for hosting us. Many thanks to my guest, Jake. Really looking forward to catching up with my co-host, John Hogue, again, moving forward. It's a tough time of year to get 2 or 3 people in a room. But man, I'm really looking forward to catching up with you, buddy. This episode is dedicated in loving memory to James the Brain Catoulis and also the folks of Minnesota, Minneapolis specifically. You guys are heroes. Keep advocating for yourselves and love y'all. But yeah, with that, let's go ahead and get out of here. Stay sexy and super flexy, y'all.